Hi guys!
Hello!
Yay! Here we go, charting day.
Yeah.
So, we're going to do it a little differently just because I like to bust it up a little bit. I'm also feeling a little pressure because there's a guest playwright in the room. It's making me very nervous.
This is my third live, Rosa.
Yes.
I'm really nervous.
You're doing a good job.
That's right. And I thought, oh my God, I have to like prepare and put some gel in my hair or something. That's as far as I got. But look, the whole thing about this, the charting thing, I mean, we were actually talking about it last night at dinner. I mean, it's not really the way I would say this is how you should write a play. You know, like chart the thing and then fill in the blanks. But it sure is interesting on the other side of it. Again, this whole notion of sort of performance and knowing what it is. Now that said, while it's delightful that this is being filmed on this flip thing, and in some ways actually sort of goes with the project. I was telling Alana this morning, to actually do this, it would take all day to do. To actually chart a play, it takes all day. Because there's so many different kinds of layers. And I think we've talked about this before in sort of that Grey's Anatomy transparency kind of way. It would be so lovely to sort of layer things over. So you would do character, you would do theme, you would do actions, you would do words, you would do, you know, the 6 parts of the drama that we were sort of talking about as sort of your base. And it would be so easy to sort of like have them different colors and sort of do it in sort of a proper setting. The other thing about it is, after we're done with this, and this is true, I'll just speak for myself because it's very true because I'm looking at these things after the fact. I look at them and I kind of go, huh, really interesting. I mean, you don't quite know what to do with it afterwards. So I handed the symboling chart to Rebecca Teichman the other day, and it's just kind of, huh, interesting. You know, I mean, like, yeah. So it's in some ways there's a performance piece about putting this together. Do you know what I mean? So being a part of this and then sort of flipping it makes some sense in a way that's only kind of in the doing of it, which is the same of a play, isn't it? In the doing of the play is where the meaning happens, not so much afterwards. And so there's a little ephemeral quality to this kind of, hey Richard, about this kind of thing. Which is great. So it can all be erased except it's on that flip phone. So today there are a couple things that I wanted again to try to do something a little bit different. I wanted to kind of do theme things, and I wanted to kind of bring back our notion of sort of those 5 stages of tragedy that we talked about last time and see where they actually might land themselves in this play. So I'm going to need some help with those of you who know the play better than I do, and I'm sure that's most of you. And I got to remember what these are. So it could help me with I did it, and knocked over the thing. Someone's going to tell me I don't have a watch, so someone's going to tell me what things are, okay? So, one of the things, now this is going to be a really crude, prescriptive thing I'm about to say, which is, first of all, not prescriptive, but every play has a structure to it. Every play has a beginning, every play has a middle, every play has an end. You may think it should end sooner than it does, but they do end. They do end. They do begin. Something happens, and we deal with it. All right? I don't care what order it is. I don't care if it's backwards, forwards, all simultaneous time, all just one. It doesn't. They begin. They have a middle. They have an end. This is what we learn. I mean, it seems so simple and so basic, kind of thing, right? We were talking a little bit about Aristotle before, and my sense of him as, you know, the botanist as well as the philosopher, and sort of the notion of the budding flower that starts as a bud, blooms, and then fades, right? The sort of the pattern of that, the natural pattern of that. And if you think about plays as an imitation of a natural thing, that they are imitating a life cycle of some sort, right? And what has been discovered, and Richard would know this better than I, about sort of the notion of sort of a golden mean ratio that seems to occur in nature that we replicate architecturally, and we replicate by music, and I also think we replicate by how we tell stories. And appearance of abundance is going to be very grossly general. What I'm about to do, just for purposes of today, is that I look at it as sort of 2/3 and 1/3, right? If something is a finite event, the beginning, middle, end of a play, finite event, right? The mathematical theory is it's sort of like whatever is this proportion is the same percentage as this proportion is to the whole, right? So this is 1/3 to 2/3, and this proportion is the same proportion as to 3/3, right? It's got the proportional thing to it, so you're kind of constantly doing this. You're dividing yourself, okay? So I look at plays, to me, this is how we evolved the 3-act play structure, 1 act, 2 act, 3 acts, right? Because we're kind of following this sort of moment that this is going to happen, and then the rest of the play has to deal with that, right? So in contemporary drama, of course, we have a lot of 2-act plays that do this, and we don't necessarily have a lot of characters that make it. There's also something we were talking about last night. It's like, well, you get your 2-act character play, they're here, and they're acting, and you're like, well, what's going to happen here? Oh, something, and then, it kind of finishes itself out, right? So the math of it isn't very complicated, right? Unlike these plays where the math is potentially quite great, and then the math gets even more interesting, and when you have doubling and you use sort of whatever scheme is we think that they were using with those 15 to 17-ish characters on stage. I bring this sort of particular golden mean-ish thing up because in this particular play, while I have this theory that everything's kind of a pyramid of sorts, it's not an equilateral pyramid. There are some plays that are more equilateral. I mean, Romeo and Juliet, for instance, some of the comedies kind of have sort of a halfway, sort of half and half sort of ness to it, which also sometimes highlight what's there in the first half, and then highlights what's not there in the second half. And we'll show a little of that today too, although it doesn't have the same sort of proportional emotional feel to it. But this particular play, if you go all the way up through to Mark Antony's big speech to the Forum, which to me represents kind of the turning point of the play. Remember we were talking about there's that moment when all things kind of lead to, and then from that one moment, no turning back, there's no turning back. People might assume it's like the killing of Caesar. The minute Caesar's dead, it's like no turning back. It's like, yeah, they're still kind of fighting about stuff, though. It's kind of like, it actually seems like a non-event, the killing of Caesar, right? In a really weird way. It's kind of like, yeah, well, yeah, I did it, right? Remember Brutus says, well, yeah, I did it, guys. What are you going to do about it? And nothing kind of happens, So you're like, well, how is that sort of a point of no return? But so this whole notion we were talking last time about community and mob and who gets convinced and the rhetoric and all that kind of stuff really kind of happens in a turning point sense of when Mark Antony has his big moment. And remember, he follows Brutus, right? So that structurally has the potential. You have to top something, right? You introduce something, you have to top it, and then the result of that. There's also this interesting 3-part, going back to this a little bit, sort of coming out of the 19th century and sort of a Hegelian sense of how the world works, where you make a statement, a thesis, right? You make the opposite statement, the antithesis, and out of that comes a meaning or a synthesis of that. So in some ways, this also can kind of fill into that. And some plays are actually built like that have that kind of tension, where you present something, then you present and then they kind of work themselves back and forth through that. It was one of the arguments, you may recall, Richard, that we made when we wanted to switch the scenes back in Les Blancs. I made a big Marxist argument about how she was following Marxist structure, and that therefore she had thesis, antithesis, thesis, synthesis. And for some reason, the executor of the state bought that theory, and we got to do what we wanted to do. So, just keep talking fast. It's fantastic, right? Say it with passion. Just say it with passion, right?